You will spend 200 hours this year on your knees pulling weeds. That is 5 full work weeks in your own yard, doing the same job that grows back before your knees even recover. These 13 ground covers end that permanently. Not just this season, every season from here forward. Ground cover number 4 was used by estate gardeners in the 1800s to eliminate hand weeding from their hardest borders completely. Not cut it down, eliminate it. And number 13 is not one plant. It is a 2-plant combination that permanently solves the one shady, dry, impossible spot that defeats every other ground cover on this list. Drop your state in the comments right now, because your USDA hardiness zone determines exactly which of these 13 will spread fastest and choke out weeds in your specific yard this growing season. If you are not subscribed yet, here is what that means practically. Every week this channel releases one video, zone-specific, experience-based, built around what actually works in real American yards. Not generic advice that sounds right until it meets your soil, your climate, your conditions. Subscribing means every new video comes to you automatically, without you having to search for it. Hit subscribe now, and make sure next week's reaches you. Plant number 1, Creeping Thyme. Every patch of bare soil in your yard is an open invitation, and weeds accept that invitation fast. Creeping Thyme answers it permanently. It spreads 12 to 18 inches per year, forming an interlocking mat that physically blocks weed seeds from ever reaching soil. That mat creates a microclimate at ground level, lower temperature, reduced light penetration that makes germination of common weeds essentially impossible underneath established coverage. What most gardeners never hear is that foot traffic actually makes this plant work harder. Every time someone walks across it, the leaves release thymol, the same compound that makes thyme antibacterial in your kitchen, and that compound creates a naturally hostile environment for competing plants every single time someone crosses that ground. If you are in zones 4 through 9, and that covers the vast majority of the continental United States, Creeping Thyme grows as a cold-hardy perennial that handles hard freezes without any protection. In zones 4 and 5, it stays evergreen through winter, providing weed suppression without seasonal gaps. In zones 7 through 9, it is drought-tolerant once established, spreading fastest in the hot, dry conditions that defeat most other ground covers by August. For varieties, elfin thyme is the most compact, perfect for filling gaps between paving stones. Pink chintz produces masses of soft pink flowers through summer, ornamental enough for your most visible front yard beds. Red creeping thyme spreads slightly faster and covers large areas more quickly. Now here is the part that goes against everything your instincts tell you. Plant creeping thyme in your worst soil. Poor, lean, dry ground produces denser, more compact coverage than rich, amended beds ever will. Every impulse says improve the soil before you plant. With creeping thyme, the opposite approach produces better results every single time. Bark mulch costs money every season, breaks down by midsummer, requires physical installation, and still lets weeds through. Creeping thyme costs one planting and provides denser, more permanent suppression that strengthens every year. After 3 seasons, that comparison is not even close. Plant number 2, White Clover. White clover fixes atmospheric nitrogen directly through its root nodules. That means it fertilizes the ground it covers continuously, all season long, at 0 cost to you, while simultaneously suppressing every weed that tries to share that ground. Research confirms that clover-covered ground requires 60 to 80% less nitrogen supplementation while maintaining equivalent growth and vigor. You are not just eliminating weeding. You are actively improving the soil health of your entire planting area in the process. White clover was a standard ingredient in American lawn and garden seed mixes through most of the 20th century. Seed companies advertised it as a premium component. Then, in the 1950s, herbicide manufacturers whose products killed clover alongside weeds ran a deliberate national campaign to rebrand it as a weed. Within 1 decade, a plant that had been considered a garden asset for generations was officially reclassified as a problem, not because anything changed about the plant itself, but because it was far more profitable to sell you herbicide than to let your garden fertilize itself for free. That campaign worked completely, and most American gardeners have been pulling out a free soil amendment ever since. White clover spreads by runners and seeds at the same time, filling bare ground faster than most weeds can establish a foothold. It stays green and actively suppressing weeds through the summer drought that turns competing weeds brown and dormant, which means it outcompetes weeds hardest in the exact season weeds are most aggressive. Hardy across zones 3 through 10, there is no American climate where this plant does not perform. Drop in the comments right now. Did you grow up believing clover in a lawn or garden was a weed? Because the honest answer tells you exactly whether that 1950s herbicide marketing reached your household before the traditional knowledge did. Write yes or no below. That one comment tells me everything about how far that campaign traveled, and I want to know how many people watching this were taught to pull out a plant that was actively working for them the entire time. Plant number 3, Creeping Jenny. This is the fastest spreading ground cover on this entire list, and the way it spreads is unlike anything else here. Creeping Jenny roots at every single node. Every stem that touches soil becomes a new independent plant. In year 1, you have 1 plant's worth of coverage. In year 2, every single node from that first season is producing its own runners simultaneously. You do not have twice the coverage of year 1. You have 4 to 5 times because the expansion compounds on itself from every direction at once, not outward from a single center, but from every point of contact with the ground, all at the same time. Most gardeners try to manage how far it spreads. The gardeners who let it run free are the ones who never return to that spot with a trowel again. That is not a problem to control. That is the solution you have been looking for in every problem bed you have in your yard right now. The golden form produces vivid chartreuse foliage that genuinely lights up shaded areas, brightening dark corners under trees and along north-facing structures while suppressing weeds at the same time. In zones 3 through 9, it is fully cold-hardy and returns reliably every spring. It performs best in moist partial shade, the exact condition under trees, and along north-facing walls, where most other ground covers fail entirely. Before plant 4, one honest question for you. How many hours have you spent this season alone, clearing the same bed, only to find it completely full again 2 weeks later? Every single one of those hours has the same answer: a plant that wants that ground more than the weeds do. This channel exists to match you with exactly those plants every single week, matched to your zone, your yard, your actual conditions. Subscribe right now. Free, always will be. Plant number 4, Ajuga, Bugleweed. This is the plant that professional estate gardeners in the 1800s used to eliminate hand weeding from their borders entirely, and the reason they chose it has nothing to do with how it looks. Ajuga spreads by runners moving in every direction simultaneously, not outward from a single central point, but from every stem at once, creating an interlocking surface mat that physically prevents weed seedlings from ever receiving enough light to establish themselves. The weeds are not being chemically discouraged. They are being physically crowded out of existence by a plant that simply refuses to leave space for anything else to survive. Professional head gardeners at large estates in the 16th and 17th centuries planted Ajuga along borders specifically to eliminate weeding labor, not reduce it, eliminate it. They understood something the modern garden industry has spent considerable effort making American homeowners forget. The best weed control is not a product you repurchase every season. It is a plant that permanently occupies the space and refuses to give it back. 4 varieties worth knowing. Black Scallop produces near-black, glossy leaves that deliver the most dramatic foliage color available in any ground cover at any price point, ornamental enough for your most visible front yard beds. Burgundy Glow has foliage in burgundy, pink, and white that looks professionally designed without any professional effort or expense. Catlin's Giant produces larger leaves and taller flower spikes than standard Ajuga, and covers ground measurably faster, the best choice for large problem areas that need rapid coverage. In zones 3 through 9, Ajuga is fully cold hardy. In zones 6 through 9, it stays evergreen through winter, providing suppression in the months when most ground covers go dormant and leave soil exposed for early spring germination. It spreads fastest in moderate shade, the dappled light under trees where grass consistently dies and weeds return every 2 weeks no matter what you do. Those frustrating strips along your fence line, those narrow beds beside your driveway where weeds come back every single time regardless of what you apply. One planting of Ajuga, and that problem ends. The plant takes the territory and keeps it. You never go back to that specific spot with a trowel again. Plant number 5, Sweet Woodruff. There is a spot in almost every established American yard that defeats everything. The dry shade under a mature tree, where you have tried grass seed every fall, lay bark mulch every spring, planted 2 or 3 different things over the years, and quietly walked away from it. Sweet Woodruff did not adapt to that condition. It evolved from it. That is the difference between a plant that struggles in dry shade and one that performs there better than anywhere else in your entire yard. Sweet Woodruff spreads by rhizomes through dry, compacted soil where most ground covers cannot push root systems deep enough to survive the summer. It forms a dense, weed-suppressing mat that requires absolutely nothing once it has established in its target zone. In late spring, it produces white, star-shaped flowers carrying a genuine sweet fragrance, real ornamental value sitting on top of functional weed suppression. 2 jobs from 1 planting that costs you nothing after the first season. In zones 3 through 8, covering the entire Northeast, Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Pacific Northwest, and most of the South, Sweet Woodruff is fully cold hardy. In zones 7 and 8, it may go semi-dormant during peak summer heat, but it returns completely in fall, providing active suppression through the season when cool weather weeds are most aggressive and most difficult to control. The counterintuitive truth about this plant is the same truth that applies to every great weed suppressor. It performs worse in good light and rich, fertile soil. Its absolute peak performance is in the spot you have already written off. Stop treating that area under your oldest tree as a problem to solve with products. Start treating it as the exact habitat this plant was built for, and watch what happens over 2 seasons. Plant number 6, Sedum, stonecrop. This ground cover grows on rooftops without irrigation. What it does in your yard with occasional rainfall is the most effortless weed suppression available to any American gardener, regardless of their climate zone. Sedum stores water directly inside its own leaf tissue. Each leaf functions as an independent reservoir. It does not depend on you, on rainfall schedules, or on soil quality to perform. It depends entirely on itself, and that self-sufficiency is exactly what makes it the most reliable option for hot, dry, difficult spots where every other ground cover gives up by August and leaves bare soil wide open for late summer weed flushes. Traditional Norse and Germanic builders used sedum on rooftops for centuries, not as one option among several, but as the only plant that reliably survived rooftop conditions without any irrigation infrastructure. Buildings across Scandinavia were insulated and stabilized by sedum through winters that killed everything else planted outdoors. A plant proven on exposed rooftops for 400 years without a single watering will handle your dry garden's slope or your neglected south-facing bed without a single complaint from you. In zones 3 through 9, it is fully cold hardy. It is most effective as a weed suppressor in zones 6 through 9, where summer drought defeats competing weeds but does not affect sedum performance at all. In zones 3 through 5, the fall color display, deep red and burgundy tones peaking in October, provides genuine ornamental value through the season when most ground covers look exhausted and finished. Here is the detail that changes how you plant it. Sedum placed in rich, fertilized soil grows floppy, loses its compact spreading habit, and becomes measurably less effective at suppressing weeds. Sedum planted in your worst, leanest, driest ground stays low, spreads aggressively, and produces its most intense color. Your most neglected, most abandoned, most difficult spot is this plant's preferred address. Stop fighting that area and start planting directly into it. Plant number 7, Creeping Phlox, Moss Phlox. Most gardeners buy this plant because it looks extraordinary in spring, and they want color in a front bed. What they do not realize until the second season is that they also bought one of the most effective early-season weed suppressors available in American gardening. Creeping Phlox produces such dense flower coverage in April and May that it actively blocks the early spring weed flush before most other ground covers on this list have fully emerged from dormancy. It blooms at the exact moment weeds are most aggressive, most vulnerable, and most likely to claim bare soil if nothing is there to stop them first. The Reframe Your Yard needs is straightforward. Nurseries sell this plant as an ornamental. You are using it as infrastructure. One planting doing 2 jobs at once, the visual impact your neighbors notice from the street, and the weed suppression that means you never touch that bed again after the first season it establishes. Here is the placement detail most gardeners get backwards. Plant Creeping Phlox on a slope, not on flat ground. Slope drainage prevents crown rot and produces the most aggressive lateral spread you will see from this plant. The spots in your yard that are physically hardest to maintain, the banks, the inclines, the slopes you currently mow with one hand on the mower and genuine caution, those are exactly the spots where Creeping Phlox belongs. Zones 3 through 9. It pairs naturally with Sedum in the same bed, Phlox handling the spring suppression window and Sedum carrying the load through the summer drought months when heat defeats everything else. If you have watched this far and still have not subscribed, here is the straightforward truth. Every week there is a new video on this channel with the same level of detail, the same zone-specific, experience-based information that tells you exactly what works in your specific yard and exactly why. The gardeners who subscribe here are the ones who stopped spending money on the same products every season and started making one-time planting decisions that pay them back every year after. They are the ones their neighbors stop on the sidewalk to ask about. Their yards look better, cost less to maintain, and take less physical effort every single season. If that is where you are headed, and watching this far tells me it is, subscribe right now. Free. Always will be. Plant number 8. Pachysandra. This is the ground cover that professional landscapers install under trees at commercial properties across America, not because it looks impressive in a sales brochure, but because it works every single season without requiring anything from the maintenance crew. Large commercial operations run on strict budgets. When a landscape contractor selects a ground cover for an area they cannot afford to return to every 2 weeks, they choose Pachysandra. That choice, made by professionals managing dozens of properties simultaneously, is the most reliable recommendation you will ever receive about any ground cover on this list. Pachysandra creates the most complete weed barrier of any plant here, a dense, evergreen, year-round surface that never leaves soil exposed regardless of the month. No spring gap while it is still emerging from dormancy, no fall gap while it is dying back, no winter gap when the ground sits bare and vulnerable to the earliest spring weed germination. 12 months of continuous coverage from one planting that strengthens measurably every year it stays in the ground. It spreads by underground stolons, creating a root network so dense that established patches require essentially nothing beyond occasional edging at bed boundaries. It tolerates deep shade, the single most limiting condition in American yard maintenance, performing reliably where no other ground cover on this list is as consistent season after season. In zones 4 through 8, it is fully cold hardy. Best performance comes in zones 5 through 7 under deciduous trees, where it actually benefits from the leaf litter that falls each autumn as natural mulch on top of established patches, feeding the root system without any input from you. The trees creating your maintenance problem become part of your maintenance solution. The financial math on this plant is worth saying plainly. Mulch for an average American yard runs between $200 and $600 per season, requires physical installation every spring, breaks down by midsummer, and still allows weed emergence throughout the growing season. Pachysandra planted once under those same trees provides superior suppression that improves annually at zero ongoing cost. The cost comparison over 5 years is not close. The physical effort comparison over 5 years is not close either. Those areas under your trees that you remulch every spring and pull weeds from every 2 weeks through summer, one planting of Pachysandra redirects every hour you currently spend on those spots to something you actually want to be doing with your time. Plant number 9, Liriope, lily turf. This one is specifically for the gardeners in the South, the Deep South, and the transition zones who have spent years being handed ground cover advice that does not survive their first August. Almost every recommendation in mainstream American gardening fails in Zone 8 and 9. The humidity is too high, the heat too relentless, the summers too long for most of what gets recommended. Liriope does not fail in those conditions. It was built for them. Established Liriope produces a root mass so dense that weeds physically cannot penetrate it from below. Hand-pulling weeds from inside an established Liriope planting is nearly impossible because the root network below the surface has left no open soil for anything else to anchor into. It handles drought, clay soil, the full root competition from large mature trees, and the complete humidity range of southern summers without thinning, without going dormant, and without requiring a single intervention from you after the establishment window closes. It looks exactly like an ornamental grass, and that is the detail that causes most homeowners to treat it purely as a decorative edge plant, never realizing that the root system below the surface is functioning as one of the most effective weed barriers available in their climate zone. In zones 5 through 10, with peak performance in zones 7 through 10, it covers the full range of southern and transitional American yards that most ground cover lists leave completely unaddressed. If you are in zone 8 or higher, drop your state in the comments right now. Tell me how many times you have been given ground cover advice that did not survive your first real southern summer. Because what you just learned about Liriope is the answer that advice never gave you. And I want to know exactly how many of you have been fighting this problem in a climate that most gardening content was never written for. Plant number 10, Bishop's weed, gout weed. The most aggressive weed suppressor on this entire list, and the one that requires one specific decision before you put it in the ground. Plant it inside a hard physical boundary, concrete paths on both sides, a building foundation, a contained raised bed with solid edges. Inside those boundaries, nothing grows alongside it. Not weeds, not grass, not competing plants of any kind. The coverage is total. The suppression is permanent. and the maintenance requirement after establishment is nothing. That aggression, properly directed, is not a warning. It is exactly the quality that makes it the right tool for the right spot. The variety called Snow on the Mountain has white-edged, variegated foliage that makes it one of the most visually striking ground covers on this entire list. The plant that sounds like it requires caution is also one of the most attractive options available when given a space with defined edges and clear boundaries. In zones 3 through 9, it is fully cold-hardy across the complete northern range of the continental United States. One important note: check your state's current guidance before planting near natural woodland areas. In some mid-Atlantic and northeastern states, it has naturalized into forest edges. In a contained garden setting away from natural land, it performs as one of the most complete and permanent weed solutions available to any American gardener. Before the final 3 plants, send this video to one person you know who spends every Saturday morning pulling the same weeds from the same spots. One person who has tried mulch, tried sprays, tried pulling by hand for years, and is still on their knees fighting the same ground every single weekend. No message needed, just send them the link. You might give them back every weekend morning they are currently losing to a problem that has a permanent answer. And if you have not subscribed yet, plant 11, 12, and the system that closes this list are worth staying for. Now, tell me something before the final segment. Of everything you have seen on this list so far, which single spot in your yard came to mind first? The one you have fought the longest, spent the most on, tried the most products in, and still cannot keep clear? Drop that spot in the comments with your state and your zone, because the final 3 plants on this list, including the 2-plant system promised at the very start of this video, were built for exactly the conditions you are about to describe. Plant number 11, Vinca minor, periwinkle. This ground cover has been growing continuously in American gardens since colonial times. 300 years of uninterrupted American garden use, 3 centuries of changing trends, shifting fashions, new products, new marketing campaigns, and this plant outlasted every single one of them. The reason is not complicated. It works, it keeps working, and it asks almost nothing in return, year after year after year. Vinca minor spreads by runners that root at nodes, creating dense, interlocking coverage across slopes, banks, and flat areas with equal effectiveness. It is evergreen in zones 4 through 9, which means it provides a year-round weed barrier with no seasonal gaps whatsoever. No spring gap while it is still emerging, no fall gap while it is retreating, no winter gap when bare soil sits exposed and vulnerable to the earliest spring germination. The coverage is continuous, and continuous coverage is the only kind that actually eliminates weeding rather than simply reducing it between gaps. Now here is the angle on this plant that matters most for a significant portion of the people watching this video. Mowing grass on a slope is one of the most physically demanding and genuinely dangerous routine maintenance tasks in any yard, particularly for gardeners over 60. The incline, the weight of the machine, the footing, the risk of a slip, every one of those factors is present every single time that slope gets mowed. Slopes covered in Vinca minor require nothing after establishment. No mowing, no pulling, no seasonal attention of any kind. That slope that currently demands your physical effort and your caution every single week becomes the lowest maintenance area of your entire property from the season it closes in. Vinca minor tolerates shade, moderate drought, poor soil, and the fierce root competition from established mature trees that defeats most alternatives entirely. It handles the full combination of difficult conditions that exist under the oldest trees in most established American suburban yards. The same combination that makes those spots so consistently frustrating to maintain with anything else. One transparency note worth making directly. In some mid-Atlantic and northeastern states, Vinca minor has naturalized into forest edges beyond garden beds. If you garden near natural woodland areas, check your state's current guidance before planting it in adjacent beds. In contained garden areas away from natural land, it remains one of the most reliable, lowest maintenance, longest proven ground covers available to American gardeners. That transparency matters because accurate information serves you better than the version of every plant that only tells you what sounds best. Plant number 12, wild ginger. Before the finale system is revealed, this plant earns its own section because it is the essential second layer that makes the finale work. Wild ginger is native across most of the eastern United States. It did not adapt to the conditions under Eastern American deciduous trees through breeding or selection. It emerged from those conditions over thousands of years. That distinction matters in a practical way. Native plants in their native conditions do not struggle to establish. They recognize the soil, the light level, the root competition, the moisture pattern, and they take over because that environment is exactly what they were built for. Wild ginger's large, heart-shaped leaves overlap completely to create full light exclusion at soil level. Nothing germinates underneath an established patch because nothing receives enough light to attempt germination. The root system binds soil deeply, filling the gaps that above-ground spreaders leave at root level, which makes it the essential second layer in the system that follows, the layer that closes the door at ground level, while the first plant closes it at the surface. Most American gardeners walk past wild ginger at the nursery. No showy flowers, slow spread in the first season, nothing that pulls the eye immediately. The gardeners who plant it anyway and give it 2 seasons to establish are the ones who permanently solve their dry shade problem while everyone else continues cycling through products and plants that fail in that same spot every year. In zones 3 through 7, covering the entire Northeast, Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and Upper South, it performs reliably without any input after the establishment window closes. Plant number 13. The Sweet Woodruff and Wild Ginger System. This is the plant promised at the very start of this video, and it is not a single plant. It is the most complete answer to the hardest weed problem in American gardening, the deep, dry shade under a mature deciduous tree, the spot where you have tried grass seed every fall, laid bark mulch every spring, planted 2 or 3 different things over the years, and quietly accepted that weeds and bare soil are simply what that area produces. That acceptance ends here. Sweet woodruff and wild ginger planted together function as a single self-sustaining weed suppression system that accomplishes something no individual plant on this list achieves alone. Sweet woodruff spreads quickly and fills the upper layer of the ground cover surface, above ground coverage closing in from the first growing season. Wild ginger spreads more slowly but roots far deeper, binding soil and filling the gaps that sweet woodruff's above-ground spread leaves at the root level. Together, they create a 2-layer barrier, surface coverage and root-level occupation simultaneously that gives weeds no entry point at any depth in the soil profile. The surface is closed. The root zone is occupied. There is no opening left for anything else to establish. This combination is documented in native plant restoration work to reduce weed emergence by over 85% in dry shade conditions within 3 growing seasons. 3 seasons of compounding, self-reinforcing establishment that produces a permanent result requiring 0 ongoing maintenance after it closes in. Sweet woodruff is hardy in zones 3 through 8. Wild ginger performs reliably in zones 3 through 7. The combination works across zones 3 through 7, covering the entire Northeast, Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and Upper South, exactly where the dry shade under mature deciduous trees problem is most common, most persistent, and most frustrating for American gardeners. That spot under your oldest tree, the one where you have spent money, spent effort, spent seasons trying things that did not hold.
This system turns it into the most naturally beautiful, most completely hands-off area of your entire property. 1 planting, 2 plants, a problem most American gardeners consider permanent, solved in 2 growing seasons. That is the most honest promise on this entire list, and it is the one worth making last. Now, before this video closes, there are 4 things every gardener must know, or these plants will underperform regardless of which ones you choose. This section is what separates a ground cover that genuinely suppresses weeds from one that simply grows alongside them and leaves you still pulling. The first thing is plant density at installation. 3 plants per square foot minimum. 1 plant per square foot creates gaps that weeds fill while the cover is still working to establish itself. Dense planting at installation is the single variable you control completely, and it determines whether the first season produces a weed-free bed or 2 years of managing a half-built system that still requires attention. The upfront cost of planting densely is recovered entirely in the first season through eliminated weeding hours. Plant sparse, and you spend 2 full seasons maintaining a cover that was never given the density it needed to do its job. The second thing is managing the establishment window. Every plant on this list needs 3 to 6 months before it suppresses weeds independently. During that window, and only that window, use 3 inches of fine bark mulch between your new plants to prevent weed competition while the root systems develop. After establishment, the mulch breaks down naturally, the ground cover closes in over it, and you never return to that area with a trowel again. 1 carefully managed season delivers years of maintenance-free coverage. That is the entire investment. The third thing is edge maintenance as the only ongoing task. Established ground covers do not need weeding inside the planting area. They need edging at the boundaries, where they meet your lawn, your paths, or your adjacent beds. A clean physical edge maintained twice per season keeps the cover contained and makes the entire planting look intentional and professionally executed. That is the complete ongoing maintenance requirement for every single plant on this list. Edge twice a year. Nothing else inside that bed. Nothing. The fourth thing is consistent watering during establishment only. Every plant on this list is drought tolerant once it has established its root system. The one mistake that costs gardeners the most during the establishment window is inconsistent watering in the first 8 weeks. Deep water twice per week for the first 2 months. Not a surface rinse, deep watering that reaches the root zone. After that 8-week window closes, the plant sustains itself completely. That window is the entire physical investment this system asks from you. 8 weeks of attention in exchange for permanent results. Every season after that, the ground cover does the work. If you have spent years maintaining a yard that takes more from you than it gives back, more time, more money, more physical effort, more weekends on your knees doing the same job that comes back before the week is out. These 13 plants are the beginning of changing that relationship permanently. Not temporarily, not until the next weed flush. Permanently. Subscribe right now. Every single week, this channel delivers practical, zone-specific, honest content that gives your time back and makes your yard the one your neighbors stop on the sidewalk to ask about. Free, always will be. And every week that passes without subscribing is a week of that information you did not receive. Tell me in the comments what the single worst weed spot in your yard is right now. The place you dread every week. The spot that comes back no matter what you apply, no matter how many times you clear it, no matter what product you try next. Drop it below with your state and your USDA zone. Point to the specific plant or system from this list that solves it, and answer as many as possible directly. Send this video to one person you know who spends their weekend mornings weeding the same spots that come back every single week. One person who has tried everything and is still fighting the same ground. No message needed, just the link. You might give them back every weekend morning they are currently losing to a problem that now has a permanent answer. Plant once, weed never. Now here is the question worth sitting with after everything on this list. Of all 13 plants covered here, which one are you most surprised actually works, and which one are you planting first? Because those two answers are rarely the same, and the reason why tells me exactly what your yard has been up against all along. Drop both answers below. Every single comment gets read.